Navigating Risks on the Airport Surface.
Welcome back. For decades, pilots have known that takeoffs and landings are the most challenging segments of any flight. But as recent events have repeatedly shown, there are significant risks involved just taxiing to and from the gate. Even as the number of in-flight incidences continues to decline, we're seeing more and more collisions, incursions, and excursions on the ground. The NTSB has recognized this and put airport surface operations on its most wanted list for several years running now. In our final panel of the day, we have brought together several experts to discuss how to improve safety on the ground, from new equipment and training to improving the situational awareness of pilots, controllers, and ground workers. Our moderator is my good friend, First Officer Steve Jangelis, who chairs ALPA's Airport and Ground Environment Group. Steve, please introduce your panel.
Thank you for being here for our last panel to close out another successful and productive air safety forum. My name is Steve Jangelis, and I am the Airport and Ground Environment Chairman for the Airline Pilots Association. And again, I will serve as the moderator of this panel titled Navigating Risks on the Airport Surface. We've assembled a great group of panelists who I get the great pleasure to work with often on a number of airport safety issues. With us today is Mr. Michael O'Donnell from the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration. Mike serves as the Director of Airport Safety and Standards and is responsible for all airports in the United States and U.S. territories. His responsibilities include oversight and annual certification inspections of all airports. This includes the lighting, markings, signage, aircraft rescue and firefighting, and wildlife management plans, as well as the overall safety of the airside operations. Mike has been a great partner with ALPA in making sure that pilots are part of the airport safety discussion and always has an open door for me and our concerns. Next is Captain Kevin Hiatt, President and CEO of the world-renowned Flight Safety Foundation. The Flight Safety Foundation is a nonpartisan leading voice of safety for the global aviation community. Captain Hiatt and the Foundation are experts on all aviation safety matters and are respected as a constant, steady advocate promoting safe aviation practices, not just here in North America, but in all corners of the world. Following Kevin is Mr. Jim Krieger. Jim is the group manager for the FAA's Runway Safety Office and is an air traffic manager for Chicago O'Hare's International Airport, one of the world's busiest, and is a founding member of the FAA's Airport Construction Advisory Council. Jim wears many hats, and that's not because he enjoys long days and busy agendas. He does it because he's a true safety advocate who's partnered with the Airline Pilots Association on numerous occasions to make sure our runways stay safe as we experience a steady growth in operations and development of next-gen initiatives. Finally with us today is Mr. Chris Oswald, Vice President of Safety and Regulatory Affairs for the Airports Council International. ACI advances the interests of world's airports and promotes professional excellence in airport management and operations. Chris is also serving as the industry chairman for the FAA's Research, Engineering and Development Advisory Committee, REDAC for short, for airports. His primary expertise is airport planning. Chris is a strong advocate for safety at airports and was so good on last year's airports panel, we just had to have him back. So as you can see, this panel contains important and vital players in airport safety. Speaking of players, the traveling public has no idea how much each person on this panel and the organizations they represent and work for must collaborate to keep our airports safe. In fact, as we will discuss, we're as safe as we've ever been based on the teamwork of the parties here. Every successful flight begins and ends at an airport. We're well aware of that, but the safety margins we currently enjoy now at these airports weren't achieved by luck, but by continued attention to detail of issues affecting each individual airport. And not all airports are the same. Each have their own characteristics. Whether it's snow operations or intersecting runways, there is no cookie-cutter approach to airport safety. It must be adapted and monitored as growth occurs. With that in mind, let's start off this panel. And as we cover a number of airport safety topics, please save your questions to the end of our discussion, where we will open up the floor where you can take the microphones and ask questions, and we'll also have a text ability where you could send in questions to the panel. So to get started, the National Transportation Safety Board publishes a list of the top 10 most wanted advocacy priorities, and first on the list was improving airport surface operations. We've seen the number of minor incidents, such as ground collisions and excursions, rise recently here in the United States. As I look towards Captain Hiatt, based on your data, do you see this trend in the NTSB on target with this priority?
Yes, Steve. Thanks again for the opportunity for us to be here today, and I do see that trend starting to eke back up. If you take a look at just the incursion numbers over the past 3 years, starting with 2010, it took a little bit of a dip in 2011, and now it's come back up again in 2013. So the incursion side, and I'm sure my cohorts here from the FAA will be able to, tell a little bit more about what's happening here in the United States. Internationally, worldwide, it's the same type of a trend. One of the other trends that I thought we might take a look at quickly before we get into more of the on-surface issues are the actual runway excursion issues. And I've got a slide here that I'd like to put up and have everybody take a look at real quick. This is provided to us from the National Aerospace Laboratory of the Netherlands. This information just came in, and by the way, it's in our July issue of the Aero Safety World at the Foundation. But if you want to take a look between 2010 and 2012, the top 3 causes of runway excursions, you can see right there across the top. The commercial air transport side is almost 45% of the events that happen are due to a wet, contaminated runway. Then we've got the long landing as far as the next of the top 3, and then fast approach touchdown. And you could mix any one of those 3 together, and you can see where the issues are really starting to surface when it comes to the runway excursion. Now, I've got some other data here just that I'm going to read off to you very quickly. When it takes a look at the runway excursions just worldwide, for this period, again, from 2010 to 2012, we've experienced, Steve, about 66 total excursions. That's about 2.2 per month. So that's not a small number when you take into account what's happening out there in the airport environment. And you can break these down into phases. The landing phase of the accident, there's about 59 of those. The takeoff phase is 7 of those. Overruns, 31, which come from 5 from takeoff and 26 from landing. The veer off, or as I would say, excursion off to the side, 35 of those, 2 on takeoff, and again 33 on landing. You start to see this trend about landing. Fatalities between 2003 and 2012, and this was just given to us from our friends at Boeing, and I've got permission to talk to this today. There have been 16 total fatal accidents with what we call abnormal runway contact. It's either an undershoot or an overshoot, or undershoot or basically an excursion on the other end. 765 fatalities, both on board the aircraft and externally. So you can see just through this broad-based brush right now at this time that these are some of the bigger issues to look at when it comes to the approach, landing, and takeoff phases of using the runway. And that's good enough for the slide. Thanks, guys.
Great. Jim?
It doesn't sound like my mic. Oh, there we go. That's working now. That being said, I completely agree with everything that Kevin just put out there. And, so we fare a little bit better here in the United States when it comes to the excursion issue. But as the new person on the block, so to speak, in runway safety, it's one of the areas that I'm very much concerned about, and that's because, frankly, we've focused most of our attention over the last few years on incursions, which is a noble cause also, not blaming anybody or anything like that. But I think we have a lot of work to do when it comes to the excursion issue because of what the statistics tell us. Right now in the FAA, there was a mobile application with a lot of videos on it that was put together to educate controllers. And it was put together by CANSO and also by the air traffic controllers, NATCA, their union, and also FAA. And right now we're in the process of getting that, publicizing that, getting ready to put it out there, because we just feel that there's a lot of things that ATC can do as well to help stem the excursion tide, basically.
Absolutely, and as we heard with previous panelists and moderators, is if we can get that data in the safety reporting culture, in the system, we could find out exactly why there are high-speed approaches, high-energy approaches, the inability to call a go-around certain gateways we heard from earlier panelists, if we can get that data from our pilots, we can compare that with notes taken from air traffic controllers through the ATSAP program. Maybe perhaps it's the approach procedure that might need to change. There's a lot of causal factors, and getting us that data and getting that down in the ASAP system for pilots is very important to help stem this tide. The chart, interesting point about that chart, if you take a look at that chart, most of it is operations related. Very rarely, I think we saw tire failure was a maintenance issue. Most of it had to do with the flight crew targeted maybe perhaps a high-speed, high-energy approach, not being able to call when it's time to go around. And one thing I have seen in operations at my airline and around the system, that there is a discussion amongst the industry, worldwide as well, that perhaps we need to set gateways with a certain standard, and stabilized approaches are the key. Being able to get to a threshold and realize that it is time to go around is a definite positive for an airline, and there's a money cost to this. Every time the aircraft I fly goes around, it's in the thousands of dollars, just like most of our airplanes that we operate in passenger and cargo service. But one good point to make is that the benchmarks are there. I believe the airlines are now promoting the proper culture to say, look, it's time to go around. Let's get a report on why you went around after you're done. And I believe the reluctance to see a flight crew get pressured into making schedule, getting in on time, beating that weather front in is not there. Safer culture is being spread around, and that's a sea change over the last few years. Cheers.
Steve, I was going to say that those are great points, of course, but on the airport side, we tend to focus on how we reduce the consequences when something like that happens. Certainly, there are ways to provide better, improved guidance, and see some advancements through next gen that'll hopefully, and some of the aircraft manufacturers programs that'll hopefully make sure stabilized approaches are closer to 100% of approaches that go on. But reducing the consequences in the event that something bad happens, in the event you have an excursion, has been a huge effort. I know, Mike's team for years now, really the past decade, has been helping our airport members in ensuring safety areas are provided, ensuring that where we have problematic configurations, we're getting engineered materials arresting systems in place. And I'm sure that most of you have seen the spectacular results from whether it's business jet in Key West, or whether it's Charleston, West Virginia, or JFK, the saves that those systems have helped us make. On the worldwide side, we haven't seen that same standard applied, and I know that ICAO is working on its revisions to Annex 14 that will provide some more significant runway, in the case of the ICAO Annex 14 world, runway end safety areas have to be a little bit different in terminology, I suppose. But I think as we see those standards and recommended practices come into play, I know already the Canadian airports are beginning to adopt those. I think Toronto moving forward with an EMAS project of its own. Hopefully, some of those consequences, those fatality numbers, even if the actual events don't go down, will fall off, and we'll see less significant consequences in the future.
Absolutely, and I think with excursions, I think why the focus was taken off was because an incursion could involve catastrophic risk with death and injury, whereas an excursion could be just as simple as a tire going off at the edge of the concrete or the paved area, and which results in very minor damage and very low fatality rate. And I believe that that's where we might have shifted the focus away from that. And I know that everyone here on this stage here has fought to try to see excursions because we're seeing the numbers climb. And absolutely, and worldwide the rates are going up much faster than we are here in North America, US and Canada. It's a definite trend we're seeing. And I have to say it has a lot to do with what Mike's group at Safety and Standards have done. The requirements for airports to have grooved runways. It's very odd, or it's very rare, I should say, to see a grooved runway outside of North America. And this is something I participated in some of the ICAO runway safety activities with the Office of Airports and Runway Safety, as well as with Flight Safety Foundation hosting their own events and offering tools to foreign airports and foreign carriers. We've seen that just to even get a grooved runway, which for the layman, a grooved runway eliminates water runoff, so that when you mix reverted rubber from landings on top of the water, or underneath the water, you start to hydroplane and can slide. And a grooved runway and planned rubber removal, we are blessed as pilots operating in and out of this country for those standards to be set and written into regulations. So that's, I think, a good slice of the reason why.
Steve, and maybe draw in Michael on this one too, because of what you do with the 139 area and the folks there, is a matter of, a lot of times we take, as pilots, all of the, as I would say, the services around a runway, whether it's the airport operator or the FAA or, the airline itself, for granted. As a pilot for over, 30 years with a major air carrier, it was a matter of, there's the runway, there's all the markings, there's all the things we're supposed to have. And it's because of you guys that have really made it work out.
Thank you for having me, Steve. We've been busy. I think, though, runway excursions, like Chris said, there's a couple pieces of it. It's what's happening on the approach on the way in. But once you hit the runway, what's going on the field at the time? And that slide showed, I think, very clearly that the 45% of excursions are related to a contaminated runway, whether it be water or snow or ice. And so we've been very busy dealing with the problem in the United States. And you'll see the excursion rates and the fatality rates are much lower in the U.S. because of what we're doing with groove runways, because of what we're doing with rubber removal, and more importantly, condition reporting. And the Takeoff and Performance Landing Assessment Group, the ALPA group, has been working on this as well, finding new ways to report runway contamination, getting a standard matrix out for airfield condition reporting. And in 2008, we changed the advisory circular for winter snow operations, where if an aircraft reports a nil braking action, the runway must close. And that was never direction before in the advisory circular until then. In addition to that, we also said that if you get 2 poor braking actions in a row, you must do something. You go out and look at the airport and at least start a continuous monitoring process. So those are making a difference, I think, over time. And then we're doing a lot of research as well in terms of trapezoidal grooves and some other technologies for melting snow that's going on behind the scenes that you don't see every day.
And that is some great work that's being done of the folks at the FAA Tech Center in Atlantic City, and your oversight of that group. It's proven when we go down there and see some of the new technology that's coming out, such as heated pavements. Folks have heated driveways, starting to see that the weight of an aircraft has an issue on those systems, but it's being tested, it's being looked at, because I've received a number of emails from people saying, I have a heated driveway and I live in Colorado, why don't we have that on taxiways? It's already being looked at, it's already being thought of, and they're doing the proper research to try to get that technology out to us. And I think we brought up a great point, and one topic I'd like to touch upon is condition reporting. It becomes very arbitrary. And I know that it's frustrating for some airport operators to decide, okay, is it time for us to go out and do snow removal? And reports are arbitrary, as we well know. You could stop a Lamborghini quicker than you could stop an 18-wheeler. We know that, depending on the vehicle that arrives. A Cessna 172 may have a different braking action from a 747. It's arbitrary based on what the pilot reports. And I know Flight Standards has put out some SAFOs and best practices, and airlines have given guidance on exactly what is considered poor, what is considered good as far as braking reports go. But having us, pilots need to file the PIREP. Pilots need to tell the control tower. And Jim, I think you're in an airport that sees it's just a little bit of snow up there in Chicago. And
Absolutely.
How does that work with you? I mean, when we give you that report, what happens?
Well, it's important, number one, for us to solicit those reports on a regular basis, because you wait long enough, things obviously are going to start happening. But no, it's very important, and what no one should feel pressured one way or the other to call the runway braking anything other than what it actually is. I think there's some concern about that at times. Well, hey, if we call it this, that, or the other, we're going to have to close the runway. Not to be a concern, because frankly, we all want to do the right thing, and we want to make sure that we keep everything safe.
Definitely. Chris, from your standpoint, then, condition reporting. I mean,
well, I think that's you get started with the joke of however many words there are for snow in Inuit languages, and I think that's a big part of it. That the conditions are so variable. And can be, you can have multiple conditions present on a given runway at any one time. And I think this is really through the ALPA and pilot studies, a lot of this has been found on how do we ensure consistency of reporting from the airport operator's perspective, and then the other even more difficult problem, and one that continues to be perplex us on the work that, and Steve, you didn't mention, you also sit on that airport subcommittee for REDAC, but as you know, it's continued to perplex us, is really getting that correlation between the pilot experience and what you're getting from the airport operator's observations. And correlating those, it's just proven extremely difficult. And I know that that's why we're still kind of in process with the TALPA ARC. So I guess I'm going to have to fall back to Jim's note, which is getting the reports back from you all and getting that honest reporting, that honest experience back is so critical for what ultimately, what actions the airport operators are going to take, whether that's on a de-icing front, whether that's on a sanding front, whether it's on snow clearance. And certainly better to have that runway closed for inspection and re-clearance than to have it closed because you've got an excursion or some type of accident.
Yeah. And the technology there is, as we spoke of, just future work being done. If we've noticed, we always every year now get a new de-icing standard table, which comes out, and that's through the research by the vendors that supply the equipment to the whether it's the ground de-icing fluid or it's the aircraft de-icing fluid. There's advances being made every year, and a new formula gets cooked up. It basically, to put it in simple terms, gets cooked up. And I know as a pilot group, we were kind of frustrated. We received from the FAA that now you have to determine what is a snow pellet, what is an ice pellet, what is a snowflake. We broke it down because it got that technical as they researched this fluid, because the fluid vendors wanted to make sure that we could get an airplane. If there is an extended delay, they could spend every minute of that delay before having to return to the gate. A return to the gate is much more costly than the application of the fluid. So that is a key technology increase we've had. And Chris?
Not to belabor it too much more, and this goes a little bit sideways on this issue. I know one thing that we've been following, and I think a number of the manufacturers and a number of the carriers have been following as well, is this underlying concern that pavement de-icers currently in place, potassium formates, potassium acetates more used in the U.S., formates used in Europe, do have a detrimental effect on carbon brakes in particular, and on other parts, some electrical components. So I just want to make everyone aware that is something that I think both at the Tech Center and there is a working group under the Society of Automotive Engineers, if you I've always had trouble actually understanding why that is, but studying that problem, and we're hoping that we can reduce some of the corrosive effects that those pavement de-icers have, so that we don't lose that effectiveness, certainly in the safety benefit we get from using them.
Absolutely, and also when you talk about getting together with groups and different panels, it's really a good thing when I hear from an airport that says, hey, could you come out and talk to us what pilots are thinking, what you're doing. The pilot's perspective at an airfield is vital. Now, we have some pilots on the stage here, but sometimes you could walk into an airport operations room and no one's a pilot, knows the lingo, or an air traffic controller, but they're the folks that are in charge of cleaning the runways, making sure they know what the surface reports are. And I think when we all get together and know each other's stresses and strains, because it is usually an experience where some snow events can go for 18 straight hours, and we're talking with minimum rest, fatigue, issues like that on the snow operator side. The airport has to monitor that. But hearing and working with the airports and the regulators and talking and sitting down and trading ideas, it helps us get to a better goal of a good, safe, quick operation in snow, inclement weather. It's a definite asset.
Let me add to that, sure, Steve, real quick, is I think as part of this organization and in other ALPA and other organizations with pilots around the world, Steve has done an excellent job of interfacing with FAA, regulatory, and airports. And on the Airports Council International side, and also on even AAAE, there needs to be more of us collectively as pilots input into those airport operators, even if it were the fact that you live in a particular city, it snows that night, and you've made some type of an acquaintance or even made that airport know that you're available to call or even provide some perspective. And you would really be amazed at how many people, airports that are smaller, and I'm talking smaller airports across the United States, but even across the world, would love to have that input. Now, you're not going to get paid. There's no doubt about that. But On the other hand, for a short period of time, if you can contribute positively to the overall safety of that particular operation, that's what we're here for.
Definitely, and I appreciate the segue because that's a very good plug for our Airport Safety Liaison program that we have. The volunteers that are line pilots, some are in the room here, some are out flying the line right now, volunteer their time and come in and give an independent safety voice to situations such as these, a discussion on the pilot's perspective of nighttime operations, snow operations, and we have 174 airports that ALPA flies in and out of just in the United States, and we try to place a pilot at each airport. And of course, there's some that are fairly remote, not a pilot base, not a large population, and there's some that go uncovered, but we try to cover that with our national exposure here by where if we hear from the AAAE or ACI, hey, would you mind sending someone to this airfield? We try to make that happen using a volunteer force, and I call it an army as if we're going to fight battle, but it's not. It's a group of dedicated volunteers with only one thing on their mind: safety, not anything other than safety. It's not there. So they're there to help. So I appreciate that segue, Kevin. Definitely, definitely. So with excursions being the primary issue with the NTSB, incursions are still happening. And they're going on, and we're monitoring the data. We're, knock on wood, so far a good year. And I was hoping, Jim, maybe you could touch upon that with the work at the Runway Safety Council.
Okay, on runway incursions themselves?
Yes.
Yeah. So, there's been some changes. There's no doubt about that. Everybody's heard of sequester and the fiscal cliffs and all that good stuff. But I have to tell you that changed nothing as far as I was concerned anyways, because our mission is just too important to be abdicated or changed. So while we may be doing different things, we're doing the same mission nonetheless, okay? So a couple of things that we've done that I really like, to be honest with you. We used to, because of our funding's a little bit different, we don't have the travel funds that we used to have, for example. So what used to happen with those travel funds, we would have our runway safety program managers that are strategically based throughout the United States. They would travel and they would go to individual airports and they would conduct a runway safety action team meeting with pilots and with controllers and with the airport operator and other groups, and it's a great thing, right? So they would go there, they would facilitate. Well, we just don't have the ability to do quite as many of those as we used to. So that's maybe the lemon part of that, but the lemonade part of that is, so we found another way to do that, and that is, I've got some great people that work for me, and they put together a local runway safety action team toolkit. And this is for an airport to use. The air traffic manager usually kicks it off. And it has everything in that toolkit that they need to know on how to run a safe, run a very good and effective runway safety action team meeting. And that's important because it tells them who to invite. There's invitations in there. It tells them what type of topics they can cover. And what I like about it too, when we've determined there's some special emphasis items that we would like to talk about, like excursions and things like that, we can inject that into the toolkit, and I really, so that's a wonderful thing. But the best part of that, as far as I'm concerned, instead of having nine experts out there in the field doing these runway safety action team meetings, we're creating literally thousands of them in the place where they really belong, where the real experts are. You folks out there in the audience, and the air traffic controllers at those airports, and the airport operators there, all the locals, the people that really matter when it comes to where the runways are and how they're used. So I kind of like that. We're giving the ownership to them. Also, you're going to see us doing a lot more things in an electronic media types of format. We're coming around to the year 2013. And in the past, we relied heavily on printed material. We would go to these RSATs, for example, and we would go to different places and we would hand out material to pilots and anybody who wanted to see these things. But now, number one, printing costs a lot of money, and number two, once you put printed material out there, and if something changes, like I'm going to tell you, approach holds are going to change pretty soon, for example. Mm-hmm. Once you have that in your possession, it's a done deal. It's disinformation now once you have it. So we're going to go to more electronic forms of communicating with all of our stakeholders out there, and that's everybody here and out at the airports. And then just a quick example that, and this is very minor, it's a flashcard system with airport signage and markings on it. We're starting with that. The final evaluation is going to be today, as a matter of fact. And also a 30-question test on signage and markings. It'll be online. And like I said, very small, but actually to me a very huge step, because we're moving away from that Gutenberg, printing technology and into that electronic media where I think we need to be.
You mean that nice little sheet that I had, that had all the signs and lightings are going to go away?
It's going away.
What
it's
am I
going to go
gonna
to your
do?
iPad.
It's going to be on the iPad. It's going to be an app.
Believe it.
Okay, all right. There's an app for that.
We
There's
can
an app for
control
that.
that.
Okay.
Jim, you didn't say there was going to be a test. Okay, no, that's great. And I do have to say that the Office of Runway Safety is ongoing. It has ongoing changes right now, and we support the office's work strongly, because the reason why our incursion rates are going down and our excursion rates are being looked at is because of that office inside the FAA taking a forensic approach to taking down incidents that happen. And I'd be the first to say it, that pilots make mistakes, controller makes mistakes. We're human, that's why it happens. But let's find out, maybe the system is not backing up the expert operators in the tower or on the vehicle or in the operations room. So I think that's very important. And the FAA website, FAA.gov, is an excellent website. It's cleaned up greatly. When you're in the agency's office and you talk to the folks there, it's just a couple mouse clicks away. You can get a lot of information. Absolutely. Construction projects, upcoming taxiway closures, runway safety videos. There's some great real life scenarios that happen that they've put animations to. So you could see where I look at some of these animations, I could say that could have happened to me. And so the education is there, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. We are in the year 2013 where we're moving away from the paper documents. It's easier to capture people's attention. If you go to the Runway Safety website or to the Office of Airports, a couple drop-down menus and you're there, and it's a great tool for the whole aviation community, whether you're an airport operator or a pilot. So.
Steve, I wanted to add one thing on the incursion side. So a lot of it has to do with airfield geometry. And whether it's a wide expanse of pavement where there's no vertical signs and the air crews or even vehicle drivers maybe get disoriented because the signs are so far apart, or it could just be a confusing intersection between runways and taxiways and issues like that. We recently updated our airport design advisory circular back last year, and it talked about how we were going to deal with complex geometry, confusing taxiways, and offered suggestions at the design stage as we repave and rebuild runways and airports across the country, that we're going to build these to a different standard in terms of perpendicular taxiways or 45-degree taxiways, and try to get away from these acute angles and multiple intersections where people can get confused. And they're quite often, if you look at the hot spots on the chart, it's an area on the airport that is just complex in geometry. It's very expensive to do because it often requires a removing of pavement or putting down of new pavement. But it's something that we're looking at, something that we're working on, and I think that that's going to show promise. The AC has also addressed the issues of landing on a taxiway in terms of rounding maybe the corner of a taxiway, making it look less like a runway, and things like that are in the advisory circular that we just now published. So a lot of work going on the incursion side. We also have a lot of technology going on in vehicles, ADS-B squitters in vehicles, GPS devices that have the airfield programmed in so the drivers won't lose situational awareness. And those are coming along as well too. So I think a lot of moving parts, but we still don't want to lose focus on the threat of an incursion at a major airport.
Yes, and that technology you speak of is excellent. When we get to see that get tested out and tried out, hope we can see it sooner than later. And the gentleman that's responsible for the certification, getting that out in the technical specs, is right here to my left, and we appreciate the work that you and your staff are doing on this and trying to get this out there, and to the vendors who are providing the equipment to airports to test and get it out there. It's vital, and airports are doing their share as well, purchasing this equipment. They've got devices now that could tell an approaching vehicle that you're approaching a runway, just like some of the equipment that we have on our airplanes. They're putting those in ground vehicles, which brings up a good point. we've had vehicle pedestrian incursions out on the runways. And just typically that. It could be a person walking across an active area, and that usually happens at some of the smaller airfields, but it also happens at the big ones at a smaller rate. But vehicle incursions onto a runway or onto a surface. And we've seen that creep up. And if someone gets a job at an airport and they're going to be given granted driving privileges at the airfield, what type of training or certification do they face before they can get out on the airfield with, say, 747s and A380s?
Chris, you want to go first?
Sure, I can.
Sure.
Well, I mean, some of that goes to my colleagues on the other side of the river, AAA, that provides a lot of that training. Some of the other training companies that are out there, but under Part 139, folks who have access to the operating area are going to need to get a driver's license, driver's permit, and that's now something that we're moving towards a recurrent requirement or a more frequent recurrent requirement, which I think is a good step that Mike's team has taken. Not one that came without some, I think, objection from some of our members, because there's always a regulatory onus on that, but I think it's certainly the right thing to do. And I think that together with that, there's kind of non-formal called recurrent training and memory aids that I know we at ACI have been trying to promote use of with our member airports. I know this goes back, and I'm going to mention a lot of airports, but Boston had a pretty significant incursion a while back, this was a few years ago, with their center field taxiway program. And I think that was a significant wake-up call on just how, whether you call it complacency, inattention, or other human factors, attending to other elements, really can get in the way of that core safety mission. So in reaction to that, in response to that, we did move ahead to provide memory aids. That's not something that you see a lot of drivers working with. And then you've got the electronic capabilities that you've mentioned and been worked on at the Tech Center to provide alerts to vehicle drivers, GPS-based systems that provide alerts when you're approaching the runway. But really it should be, I mean, it should not require an electronic aid. You just need to be present. And I think on the pilot side, you guys know that very well. On the vehicle driver side, I think it's a core element of what people operating on the airfield are going to do. Lord knows I would never go for an airfield driver's license. I'm too inattentive as it is. Same reason I wouldn't fly a plane myself. But I think that continuing to provide on a continuous basis those reminders to folks and that continuing education that they need to be focused on the driving task at hand when they're operating a vehicle on the airfield is essential. And I think we'll talk about this on the apron and non-movement areas as well, which is another big area of focus for us. I think we've seen a bit concerned about the uptick in incidents, certainly over the last 6 months, that we've seen on aprons.
Certainly, if you have construction on your airfield, you should pay attention. If you see the barricades and NOTAMs for construction out there, be on the lookout. The airports do a really good job of training the drivers out there, but I think that the chance of something happening with a large construction project go up because you've got a lot of people coming on the airfield that have never been there before. So we spent a lot of time breaking down that construction project, look at the safety plan, talk well ahead of the project with all the users and the tenants at the airport on that so that everybody knows that this is what's going to happen each day. And I think that's part of the issue that I think that a lot of the airports have already started doing for years now, which is learning how to work together beforehand, before the project even happens, get everybody at the table and talk about what's going to happen during the project, how can we reduce the chance of something going wrong, and that has proven to be very positive.
Definitely. Jim?
Steve? Well, I just wanted to add that, first of all, the FAA is working on a airfield driver course right now for standardized type of course, which I think is great. But there's also some large airports that I know about there, and probably some small ones too, that work. They work together very well. So the air traffic control tower, for example, works very well with the airport operator to make sure that every driver understands what to expect from air traffic control, for example, and things like that. You know, when you're approaching a runway and you hear somebody being lined up to be ready for an immediate, it's probably not a good time to be asking for a crossing of that runway type of thing. So I think that there's pretty good things that can be done in that regard anyways, on the local level.
But I'm going to do my biggest and best Richard Crest from CNN and go, but Steve, what about all those other airports in the world?
Great point.
We're here in the, as I call it, the white bread world of aviation. It's all nice, it's done. We've got the FAA, we've got Airports Council International sitting here with us right now. And we're talking about some fantastic advances in airport runway safety. But many of you right here in this room fly into places that are in the Caribbean that are being opened up, and those island places are still, not so much, man. You know, you've got to really be careful when you're out there. And they don't have driver programs, and they don't have grooved runways, and they don't have, as we would say, standard lighting and markings out there. And then you go to Africa, and you try to land on a runway there. And I'm not talking just a small single-engine airplane. If you take a look at the new aircraft that are penetrating into the African market, A320s, 321s, Boeing 737-800s. You've got inexperienced or low-time pilots, I should say, and airports that are now trying to figure out what to do with these big airplanes. So, you know, those are some of the new frontiers that we're going to have to be looking at.
Most definitely, especially with the global reach of the airplanes now today. You could find yourself as a pilot going to places that we never would have picked out of.
Absolutely, and you're so used to flying into, oh, it's cool, you know, this is the nice runway, and then you get there, and you know, even at our carrier, you know, you get to some of the places and you're looking at it and saying, well, the lighting and signage are not standard here, if there is some, you know.
There's a lot of work, I think, going on at the FAA with ICAO on that. I've been to Accra, and it was on a Delta 767, and it was, you know, we spent the whole week training West African nations on how to inspect an airport. And in the morning was classes during, you know, inside a classroom. And in the afternoon, we went out to the airport and literally inspected the airport. And it was all the nations in West Africa had come to this thing. And it was a great learning experience for them. But the continent is so large, and there's so many other places, and we just barely scratched the surface. Absolutely. We went to East Africa after that, but we're constantly reaching out to ICAO to encourage ICAO to adapt U.S. standards, which we think are pretty good. And certainly ICAO has some good standards that maybe we would like to do. But we're always working, at least in the Western Hemisphere and also in Europe and South America and the Pacific Rim, on helping other civil aviation organizations achieve what we've achieved in the United States, which is by far the gold standard.
Yeah. Chris?
I was going to say in parallel, so you're working primarily, I think, with a lot of the state organizations, the CAAs on the FAA side. Our world organization, ACI World, has a program called APEX, Airport Excellence and Safety. I know the S has to get in there someplace, but it doesn't make it into the acronym, which has involved a series of missions that many of which have taken place in Latin America, Caribbean, Africa. And actually, coming out of that, wildlife issues, and Mike, I don't know if I've described that, Livingston, Zambia, that the elephant actually is a bit of a wildlife risk.
That's a new one.
Elephants and giraffes.
That's really, I mean, I thought a moose was bad, but you know, really, I think the elephant's pretty awful. But really, to try to level set. Now, it doesn't even really get, I think, in a lot of cases, it may not even get to full Annex 14, ICAO Annex 14 compliance. But to understand, and this is where I think we will talk a little bit about safety management systems. This is where concepts that are you know, present in that SMS approach really apply, because you're using that to prioritize what's most critical. And for a lot of these airports, as you know, in Africa, a number of them in Latin America, you may not have access to capital. You may not be able to put in that lighting system. You may have real constraints on the qualifications of the folks that you're bringing on to the airfield. So figuring out what you know, where you're going to achieve the biggest safety bang. It's a terrible way to put it, I suppose. I need to work on my really need to work on my aphorisms here. But getting the best value for that safety dollar is really critical, and that's what these programs, I think, do on both sides. Really level set.
Expansion of SMS is important, not just here, like you say, in the U.S., but worldwide. And I know, like the Flight Safety Foundation is promoting programs to the foreign carriers and director generals of aviation in, like you say, East Africa, West African countries, to try to adapt a safety management system approach to construction, upgrades, and things like that. And discussing that, there's been some work being done towards SMS and a just safety culture at airports. And I know that the FAA is working on some regulations and trying to get it so that the airports now participate in the same realm that airlines and pilots and air traffic controllers work with, that it's now starting to migrate its way down towards the airfield, which I think is a huge advance in safety, because it's not just the airport manager's decision. The usual parties have to be brought in, all stakeholders. Yes. And right now we're working on that language. And Chris, you'd like to speak on that and just where?
Sure. And I know because we've certainly commented extensively on certainly the SMS rule, and Mike knows this probably all too well. I think the issues, and it's an interesting irony to the situation we just brought up, because I think globally, and a lot of, at least on the aerodrome side, and I think maybe in general, a lot of the SMS development really got going as ICAO initiatives, or something that ICAO really saw as a way to provide an additional level of safety, or maybe some alternative means of improving safety at airports where you might not be able to meet a full raft of standards. And the irony there is that I think when I talk to, through our world organization, some of the airports in the developing world, they're very early to embrace SMS as a concept, because they're not sure they can, there may be cases where they can't meet that minimum standards, or it may be very, very costly to do so. And again, this provides a mechanism for classifying, prioritizing the safety hazards that are observed at the airfield. I kind of liken it to the way that cell phones are, right? You kind of leapfrog. So I think we see some of that leapfrogging going on the SMS side here in the U.S., because we have this very, very robust regulatory culture on all sides, and from an airport operator's perspective, through 139, the massive collection, and one that's just admired worldwide, of advisory circulars and guidance that FAA puts out. The role of SMS is a little bit harder, or has been a little bit harder, for airports to define and understand, and really understand the value, the complete value argument. So in addition, as many of you probably know, we live in a bit of a litigious society, and one of the, here in the US, and one of the major concerns, and one that we've worked with Mike and have certainly worked with Congress on, is to understand how we're going to protect for airports, which in the US are largely public agencies, that are very, very impacted by FOIA-like regulations, data disclosure requirements, open government policies, how we protect these data, how we ensure that they're being used for the purposes that they're designed, whatever we're collecting under an SMS program, and that they're not being used to paint lurid or inappropriate pictures of what's going on at the airport. And that's a bridge we haven't quite crossed yet, and that's one that I think remains certainly for our, not just ours, but AAAE's legal folks, a huge issue that we need to overcome. The confidentiality issues. I mean, I know when we've had conversations about SIS data, for instance, using that actually in the context of establishing fuel burn savings for next gen, that was essentially something that was not going to be permitted. I mean, we're using that completely outside of a safety context. We don't have that ability to deny public, at this point anyway, public access to those data, and there are just a lot of concerns about how we're going to implement that program that I think we need to resolve. That said, I will wrap this up, I think we have seen a number of airports that are out on the front end implementing. Mike knows, I mean, we go back to my friends on my committee from San Antonio all the time. Dallas has really stepped up and moved forward with their program. Seattle's another, some smaller airports as well. And I think that those airports that see how effective those programs are, those airports' voluntary participation in those programs, probably the best way that we bring SMS in, and the safety culture, this broader safety culture, into a reality in the U.S. And we're hopeful that that will be a continuing progression here, whatever happens with the regulation.
So I would add, FAR Part 139 is a regulation that governs and regulates airports. created in the 70s. It really was, I think, the first attempt at SMS. It wasn't called SMS, it was long before SMS was a term, but that's what it was. It was risk-based, it was commercial service airports that did things a little better and a little more frequently than any other airport in order to obtain air service. And whether it be self-inspection or whatever that is. So a commercial service airport is in itself a regulated entity that operates at a safer level because of the regulation. So SMS to us what we're doing now is taking what's existing and building on that. The litigious society that we live in, yes, we agree with that. But of course, SMS is designed to prevent the accident from happening to begin with. And if an accident does happen, you're still going to end up in court. The question is, are you going to end up in court with decisions made on, like I did before SMS, just with me and the airport users without documenting it? Or do I have a process that's been vetted through the FAA, through the industry, through a rule, through advisory circulars that I followed that was adopted by the industry? That, to me, speaks volumes to any person that is worried about a litigious society or going to court because they've documented their decisions very well. The fact is you'll have good decisions documented if something does happen. But going back before that, we need to understand the whole reason why we're doing this is to prevent those from happening. And I think that's a key piece that we need to remember. And we are a product of our own success. We don't have a lot of accidents, and that's not by accident. But certainly we know that we see incidents happening, and we know that the incidents are precursors to something worse. And the SMS piece is really, I think, where we're going to get to that piece, to that next level of safety that we want to get to. It takes a lot of coordination, a lot of work with the industry. Chris and I have worked very well. We debated a little bit, and we've come around on a lot of different issues. AAAE is very much involved as well. The industry is starting to pick up on it, and I think that voluntary adaptation of SMS is now coming up. People are saying, you know what, I want to try this. I want to see where this goes. This is working for us. And I think that some airports have even seen breaks in their insurance on having an SMS plan in place. So we're excited about that. We know we have more work to do, and we'll have more guidance coming out at the end of the year and beyond that as well. But I think we're going in the right direction with air traffic and also with our friends in flight standards.
Anyone?
I could just finish up with that. I can tell you the flip side of that, and that was, when you don't have a safety culture that encourages telling people that you made a mistake and letting people know without some sort of punishment being involved, some really strange things happen sometimes. And by that I mean people are afraid to report. They can actually be lost on a runway when it's snowing in a vehicle, and they won't confess that because they're afraid of what's going to happen to them afterwards. So I have to agree. Yeah, the safety management system is a huge success for us, but until we have that blame-free reporting that goes along with it at each location, things still can go wrong sometimes.
It's definitely true, and when we can take the reports and match them up, and we face the same pressures on the airline side and the airport operator, or excuse me, the pilot operator side of FOIA data, things like that, making sure that we take that data and make it de-identified. We face those pressures on individual situations a lot of times, and if you could look towards the pilot groups and the airlines as sort of, we've been down that road. You could walk through our shoes and see how we do that, getting together as stakeholders to talk about it. And I think that's what's been great about having us involved with the discussion on the airport side of the SMS. And let's be honest, an airport is a small city. It operates with a number of political pressures. It's not just resources, monetary, but it also includes how do you get power to the airport? How do you take care of drainage, wastewater? There's a number of issues, and it operates like a small city. So it's a larger scale than what just airlines and pilots work with.
And what we're seeing, Steve, is an evolution in this entire area with the fact that you've got all of us on the stage here today recognizing that SMS is coming up, and we've got airports now that are not concerned as much with concessions as they are, concerned with, what caused the concessions to be here? Oh, that runway, which provides that airplane, which provides those people, which now provides us with that, revenue generation for this city. It's an economic engine. All of these things come together in a very intricate way, and using SMS to pierce through the top leadership of these airports, these cities that have the airports, as we know. You know, Chicago, very proactive there with their airport commission. All of these things have come together to give us a great product finally.
Yeah, definitely. And it's getting everybody together, I think, is the key, in a room discussing. And I think some of the most gratifying work that I do is when we get together post-incident and we get with the root cause analysis team and the Runway Safety Council,
Right.
and we sit down with folks here on the stage. And it's not literally take your ID off and now we're in a room talking, but it becomes when you start to know the folks you're working with and we start talking about it and trying to back away from the incident, forensically break it down and figure out, well, what exactly caused this?
Right.
But why? Why did they do this? Why did this happen? I mean, one of the most frustrating incursions that Jim and I have had a discussion of is when we get and this is mostly in the GA world, but we are guilty of it at times as pilots at airlines, is we get a hold short clearance, we read back the hold short clearance, and then we cross the runway anyway. Right. And if you break it down in this data collection system and you look at it as a data point, it doesn't always explain the situation. And they hear me say this a lot. What about the fatigue factor? What time of day was this? I can bet you, and I've said this many times, I can bet you it was after 8 p.m. Let's take a look at their schedule. And we start to open it up and look at it rather than just say this happened and the pilot had an error or the controller made an error and crossed that aircraft in front of another aircraft departing or taking off. As we're sitting down and we're breaking the system down, seeing how can we do better, what's a better way of doing business. I think it's excellent, and I appreciate the Office of Runway Safety and the ATO getting us involved with that, because we can sit down and come up with a solution rather than just point at a data point and say, well, we've seen where the problem is, it's the pilots.
Right, and I think in the old days, we would check a box, and that was it.
Yes.
And then we would stop our investigations way too soon. And then we would sit back and wonder, well, why did the same things keep happening over and over again? And that's the reason. Until you get everybody, I think the saying is within 20 feet of the problem, if you can bring everybody together and talk about it, it's amazing what you will find. I'm sure that anything that I've ever looked at, there was never just one cause. There was probably 9 to 15 at least. Approach. And so that becomes our roadmap for making sure it doesn't happen again. Can I just talk a little bit about the RIAT process, also the runway incursion assessment?
Please.
So every runway incursion in the United States gets evaluated by a team of people from airports and flight standards and also from the Runway Safety Office and also from air traffic control, that we call them the terminal types, that they take a look at it. And they do this every Wednesday afternoon in addition to the RCAT, the root cause analysis team that Steve was talking about. And what they do, they're trying to identify trends in increased risk areas, and they do a pretty good job of that. And just to give you a couple examples, some of them apply a little bit more to the GA crowd, but give you an example. When, the sheer fact of the matter is the GA community, the pilot deviations anyways, they're like 79% of all incursions, and it's an amazing factor. And it's due to education, we think. Anyways, that's the way we want to reach them. I feel that if we get, let's catch somebody doing something right instead of catching them afterwards. And so the runway incursion analysis team recognized that, so they've changed the pilot's handbook of aeronautical knowledge in response to that, for example. Instead of, let's do a violation and be on our way, it's like, hey, let's change things so people kind of get a better idea of what's going on. If you look in the pilot's handbook right now, Appendix A, it's a great information in there on runway safety all the way from incursion, excursion, and taxiway and runway confusion type of incident. So that's one example. The next one is something that Mike and I have talked about, and I'm not putting you on the spot here, Mike, I don't think, but we see on occasion, and the RIAT team has seen this also, that we have cases where single-digit runway signs at the ends of the runway, and that's an acceptable practice. And I'll use Los Angeles for an example. We'll have a vehicle in particular, sometimes it happens to flight crews too, but a vehicle will come out and air traffic control is used in runway 25 right, and they always try to state it in those terms because they want people looking in the correct direction, so they'll say come out and hold short of 25 right. The vehicle goes out there and they see that sign that says 7 left, and humans, being what we are, sometimes I don't think it doesn't click with them, and off they go across the runway. So that's another example of what the RIAT team has noticed, and Mike and I are talking about it. Not sure what we're going to do yet, but those are the kind of things we get out of the atmosphere of, hey, let's learn something from what happened instead of closing the book on some sort of a deviation or, you know, a controller messed up or whatever. So it's a much better world.
It's definitely a systems approach. I think that we need to be careful not to sign, light, and mark our way into, you know, the point of diminishing returns. I think it's important, and we have good signage and good lighting. Could it be better? What else can we do to better mark intersections? We're always looking at that, but I'm always worried about if we do too much and it becomes confusing for pilots because there's just too much out there. We're looking at spike strips, but those don't seem to go very well.
Speed bumps.
Speed bumps.
Speed bumps.
We literally did look at speed bumps as well. But I think the important point to remember is it's a systems approach now. It's not siloed where, you know, air traffic is looking at one place and flight standards is looking at one place and airports are looking at one place and the industry, airports are looking at another place. We're all bringing it together, and the Runway Safety Council has been a really good avenue to do that, and Jim now heads that up, and it has been very effective in terms of getting everybody to talk, and some of these are not easy answers. Now the signage issue, you know, we can work that. I think that's worth looking at, and we've got the tech center to do the study, we've got the pilots to ask the questions, and as long as we keep the money coming to do that, we will keep looking at it.
Sure.
Yeah, that's definitely something we need to keep in focus is backing away from the incident. The takeaways are important. Like you said, it can be as simple as maybe a sign or elimination of a sign, or maybe it's a confusing charting setup. But it goes deeper. Joe Foresto and his group at Flight Standards, who have basically brought things back into the training area when we train initial pilots. And we back that up into what's in the practical test standards for new pilots or for type rating issuance. There was a period a few years back where taxiing wasn't really an emphasis item in training modes. It was basically you were at the end of a runway with both engines running, right, and now you're going to simulate an engine failure. And complex taxi procedures weren't involved. And working with airline training departments and flight operations at the individual airlines, as well as with the Flight Standards Office, we've seen those numbers come down. This isn't just like these folks on the stage. It's also the airlines and folks behind the scenes also that are making the change. So I think we can definitely, like you say, bring everyone into the room. We get some good results. There was something we touched upon a little earlier, which I think we should open up, a discussion of the risk of construction at the airfield. And as we well know, it's not the normal operation, and it's usually temporary. And there might be sometimes I might come to an airfield maybe once every 2-3 years, depending on schedules. And that's the funniest things when people say, well, what route do you fly? It's kind of hard to narrow it down. So especially when I get out in front of airports groups, I ask, you know, what airport do you work for? And I say, I was there 7 years ago. But you could tell me where taxiway ALPA is. The only way I know is by looking at my chart.
Right.
And being able to be intuitive with the signage, intuitive with the markings, that's most important. One group that Jim was a big part of working with was the Airport Construction Advisory Council, and working with Mike's department. Let's talk about that a little bit, about if a runway project, something happens, like let's just say, take John F. Kennedy, the resurfacing operation. Now, Jim, I know the O'Hare modernization program is huge and ongoing. That is a complete facelift of the airport. That's Botox, that's everything. They're tearing that airport apart. It's a completely new configuration. But, you know, if someone says, hey, we'd like to resurface a runway and close it, how do we all get involved as stakeholders? To start out, Jim.
Start with me?
Yeah.
Sure. Okay, so let me give a little bit of history about the Airport Construction Advisory Council really quickly. Like Steve said, we're tearing O'Hare apart pretty much as we speak, or rebuilding an entirely new airport while conducting the second busiest amount of traffic at the same time. So we had a construction project back in 2009 where we shortened the runway by about 4,000 feet. And it was a 5-month project, and we had 5 really serious safety events during that project. So that got my attention because at the time I was a quality assurance manager there. And so I started to, sound the alarms off a little bit. And as we started to look around the country, we started to find more and more of this where things were happening during construction projects. And as we started to look around the globe, for that matter, it's not, no country is immune to this. Airport construction just has a way of increasing risk at an airport, no question. So the FAA decided to to put together a council, the Airport Construction Advisory Council, and Steve is part of the council. Mike's got people on the council, and we have pilots, we have controllers, we have air traffic managers, we have dispatchers, you know, because we felt that we need all the help we can get to identify every single issue that can be found out there. So one of the major areas that we found, this probably become as no surprise to most of you anyways, was the sheer amount of notices to airmen that result during an airport construction project. And what I was finding in Chicago, I'll give you an example, some of the most serious things that happened there was at a time when there was over 70-something NOTAMs in effect at the airport, and a lot of it due to the construction itself. And then the NOTAM, the way the system was set up at the time, by recency, so the NOTAM that made all the difference in the world to that flight crew that night was like number 56 down there on the list, way down the list, and obviously that's not a good thing. So what we do now from an air traffic standpoint anyways, so we require air traffic managers. You've got to contact the council and tell us that you have a project going on. That helps us kick a few things into action. We have some best practices and checklists for them to use, because we want to make sure that everything that needs to be done does get done in collaboration with all of you, for example, and people at the airport, and the controllers that are there, everybody at the airport's office, everyone getting together and making sure that you dot all the I's and cross all the T's. Can I also talk about a construction notice really quickly? Sure. One of the other things that we have too is what we call a construction notice, and you won't be able to see it out there because it's too small, but it's on my iPad. But think of an airport diagram that shows you everything that's closed on it by having a white background and red X's on it. And at a glance, using the concept of a picture tells 1,000 words, at a glance, you see everything that's closed without having to necessarily read all the NOTAMs down there that are associated with it. So we'll do those for airports too, to help people understand what's going on, not only pilots, but controllers too. Also, publicity and promotion. We think it's really important when you have a big project going on. You need to invite all the stakeholders. If your airport can afford to put posters together, whatever it takes to get the word out and get in touch with people. One other thing that the council also is working on that I want to mention really quickly too, it has to do with shortened runways, and runways that have been shortened to the construction. We found that to be the most ugly is the term, I guess, that comes to mind, situation of all. And we thought, we need something at the runway that's been shortened that tells people at the last moment what the takeoff run available is. Mm-hmm. And so we tried that out at O'Hare. And then we got a big boost from Mike O'Donnell's office also. And Mike, I can throw it your way, I think now, and maybe you can tell them the rest about the test that's coming up this summer about what color that sign's going to be.
It is such a great idea that we're going to steal it from Jim, and we're going to use it. But essentially, it talks about takeoff run available signage where you enter onto the runway. And instead of having the sign color, the regular yellow background with the black lettering, the thought was to have the sign in orange color, like a construction orange color, and actually tell the pilot as they're taxiing onto the shortened runway what the amount of runway length is beyond that point. And we just think it's a great idea, so we've adopted a test program up at the Tech Center, and we are now conducting testing on it, and it's looking good. We are trying to get surveys done, so if you get a survey on these signage, and there's a couple airports in the country that we're doing them at, we're probably going to do some more. It'll bring in good information for us to make sure we have the best signage, the best recommended color, all that needs to be figured out. But we think that this is a viable possibility for a standard for a shortened runway, and it came from Jim's shop, and the color is orange.
Very good.
This goes right along with the guy with the stop sign and the
exactly.
stop and slow sign.
Right, the stop and go there when the dump trucks cross the taxiway. Yeah.
The test color is orange. What it's going to look like when it's done testing, we'll see.
Who knows, right?
It's looking good.
That testing, of course, involves the human factor side. It's going to have pilots take a look at it from high elevation, lower elevation, the ability to discern its difference between that and an amber color is a topic we've discussed. So but I think it's a great idea. I think that it's indicative of the type of talking and collaboration that's going on rather than silo building, which I think is very impressive. when we talk about the construction point, and we talked about ramp areas as well, and ramp areas are seeing a number of incidents, such as pushback incidents, ground collisions with vehicles. I've seen this. I just saw this a few months ago. I saw an aircraft in collision with a Coca-Cola truck. How did the Coca-Cola truck get out there? To deliver the Coca-Cola to the gate, I guess. Okay, that's great. But there's vehicles that are there and in the ramp area, and as it's been described in some venues, it's the wild, wild west because markings are different, ramp areas are different, they're all individual, and each airport has their own individual idea on what to do with that. And Chris, if you could elaborate, I mean, what can we do to make the ramp areas safer?
Well, it's an excellent question. As I mentioned before, that's been a big issue for us. We saw a number of these. I mean, it started. I mean, you go back to that incredibly graphic, well televised 380 incident at JFK with the regional jet, and there's a multiplicity of factors at work, probably more so than any place else. I know Mike knows this all too well. It formed part of our comments as we talk about SMS and implementing SMS in the apron area. And it's particularly problematic in the U.S. I compare the U.S. to what I see certainly in Europe in particular, some of the Canadian airports where you have maybe a single ground handler, you don't have multiple airlines doing self-handling. You have head of stand roads in most cases, European standard. That is not really the de rigueur standard at U.S. airports, head of stand roads versus tail of stand roads. I don't know if this is what led to the Coke truck. I'm not entirely sure, but I've seen those Coke trucks out on the airport too. And I think there's also a much more diverse. I'm trying to see how I can frame this without making us look bad on the U.S., but a much more diverse set of folks on the airfield than you might see at a lot of again, compared to a European airport. Lots of different training kind of proficiencies, general skill levels, awareness, and the way that we cope with our tenants, getting back to the Coke truck, how we put guys out on the airfield. So what we're really seeking to do on the ACI side is produce a series of best practices for management of safety on the aprons. I've talked to representatives from A4A about getting them involved. I think we've talked, and I think it's an effort, again, seeing the silos break down. It's not something that an airport operator themselves or we as ACI can take on. It's something that really needs to be a collective effort on all of our parts. Because again, it's not just those vehicle drivers. It can be aircraft to aircraft. It can involve control and whether it's a ramp controller or local controllers, sure. And how they're whether or not aircraft are in the non-movement area, whether they're still hanging out as the case was with the regional jet JFK, whether or not NOTAMs are getting published at an appropriate time, which I think played some role in what we saw at Fort Lauderdale with the Spirit US Airways encounter. So I think that it's a multiplicity of things, and it's something that we do need to focus on collectively, and it's certainly not something that's solved.
I think the issue is the standardization. As a pilot goes from Columbia Airport to Columbia, the country, or heads further points further south, that we see the same markings. That's what we ask for in the cockpit and in our operations, and we hope to see that on the ramp areas. So that being said, we've had that discussion, and I know, Kevin, you support that too. From the
foundation's standpoint, we support that 100%. We did a particular study almost 10 years ago because we pulled it out about a year ago to dust it off because somebody had asked us. It was called our Ground Accident Prevention Program. It was more focused on the ground support equipment, hitting aircraft, things of that nature. But as we've seen, just talking here with Chris and listening, the other vehicles now, the Coke trucks, the whatever delivery vehicle or the vehicle that does this or that, for some reason has encroached into this, what used to be a sacred space on the ramp. And now all of a sudden, because of the way the airport is designed or economic pressures or whatever the reasons may be, we're seeing more vehicles permitted on an airport than we've ever seen before. Aviation related vehicles. In other words, vehicles that are not servicing aircraft, they're servicing the terminal itself. And that's where, looking forward into the future with terminal design, I think there could be a lot of improvements there to do away with what we're seeing. Atlanta Hartsfield Airport is one of the worst.
in terms of being busiest airport, the number of movements on a ramp, and you've got more non-commercial or non-airline oriented vehicles running around than I've ever seen before.
Definitely.
Oh, I'm sorry, we weren't supposed to say a specific airport, were we?
Oh, no, that's fine.
Okay.
I already broke that.
Airport that rhymes with Atlanta.
Okay,
That's
yeah,
okay.
That's an airport, yeah. That's that
No
big
problem.
airport down south.
Well, with that being said, we'd like to close out this panel, and I'd like to thank each and every one of you for being here today, being a part of this panel. I'd like to open it up to Q&A, and if anyone in the audience would like to approach the microphone, and also you could text in a question to the phone number 703-594-6660, and we'd be happy to take any questions for anyone here on the panel. We'll start with the microphone, Captain Mike Moss.
Yes, hi, great panel. Mike Moss, safety volunteer for Airline Pilots Association. This question is for probably Jim, you, or possibly Mr. McDonald, but I'm really encouraged by your comments about trying to, placing more emphasis on RSATs and increasing the number of RSATs locally at various airports. My question is, how do you propose to include pilot groups such as ALPA in these various meetings? There's going to be a lot of them. If we don't know about them, we can't attend them. Right. Frequently what happens, and this is no disrespect to chief pilots' offices, but many times chief pilots' offices show up and they are the pilot representation. But I firmly believe that line pilot observations, pilots in this, we're all line pilots here, we're out there every day at all of these airports. I think we have a unique perspective that is needed at meetings such as this or in the SMS process. Thank you.
No question. And how are you doing, Mike? It's nice to see you. We've worked together on many things in Chicago, as a matter of fact. But no, I understand what you're saying, and I think that's where in our toolkit, for example, when we're handing over the reins, so to speak, of the local RSAT, we need to make sure that we have the proper direction in there. That's something I want to take a look at then. It's okay, so who are we inviting and what are we expecting to get out of the folks that we invite? But I'm especially encouraged because not only the number that you had mentioned, really the number is going to stay pretty much the same, but having, as you suggest, having the right people and giving the ownership of the safety of those runways to the local level is the place that we want to be. But I'll take a look at that. I think that's a good point. Let's see who specifically, are we given enough direction as to who we should be inviting? I don't know if I answered all of your question there or not, but good.
I think that it's really good that we hit it at all levels. Like Mike, you're the local rep and you work with the local facilities and get your name there, and our volunteer force that through the Airport Safety Liaison program gets out there. And my duties, here at the national offices is to make sure that I interact with the folks so that we, I guess, attack from two different sides the issue of a meeting or a calendar event that we need to be at, and we decide and pick and choose where we put those resources. So. We're doing the best we can. It could be better. We're going to try to get as many volunteers out to these individual events. As we said, it is volunteer work, and we do respect the family life and the work life as well, too, so it's kind of hard to schedule everyone along those ways, but great point. Thank you, Mike.
You bet.
Next question.
Hi, I'm John Jester with Air Wisconsin. I'm one of Steve's Army members there as well. We're talking about the Wild West with the ramp operations, pretty much anything off the taxiway. Are we going to see the law brought to the Wild West anytime soon? I'm in the regional world, so we deal with less than optimal conditions generally. Ramp controllers that range from the ramp commander to the aircraft calling lady we have in a certain airport, and constant battle of chicken on the ramps with fuel trucks, vending trucks, tugs. So are we going to get any help?
I'll take a stab at that. I'm not so quick to jump to say, yes, let's do rulemaking and govern the ramp. I think that the problem is more complex than that. And I think I was probably most encouraged when Chris Oswald said to me a while back that ACI wanted to get out ahead of any rulemaking on the ramp and lead the industry in addressing the problem from an industry standpoint, because that's really what it's going to take. It's going to take the airports, it's going to take the airlines and the operators to figure out how we want to do it. I think standardization is super important. If we could do that voluntarily, I think that is a great thing to do. I think SMS builds into that nicely, and it is certainly an opportunity for us as we move forward with SMS, certainly the focus on what happens with ramp damage, whether it's FOD or vehicles and aircraft or vehicles against vehicles, and the markings and everything else that happens on the ramps. That this is where everything comes together. It's the land side and the air side meshed together, and it all happens right there. So it's a lot more than I think any rule could potentially cover. But I think that the industry is paying attention to it, and I think the world's waiting to see if the U.S. is going to lead in that regard. And I see us heading that direction. I think ACI and AAAE have a big role in that in terms of how they would like to see it best go, because they're the ones that operate the airports.
I think I just wanted to add. I think one of our challenges, one of the reasons that you can call it the Wild Wild West or whatever, is that we've got. I mean, you've got a kind of dispersed accountability and just a dispersed set of actors. We can talk about the Coke trucks, but I mean, I remember watching a guy run over a LAV truck, TWA, with the loading bridge from the window as a passenger. I think how we manage this issue of multiple tenants, multiple responsible people within any of these areas. It's what we're doing here. It's collaboration, and that's going to build safety culture, I think, better. That collaborative working relationship builds safety culture much better than punitive or regulatory culture. So I think the challenge is out there for us, and I think it's something that certainly we and AAA on the airport side wanting to jump into and can help to lead, but it is going to take a collection of folks from, and I'd include the ground service folks too. We really need to bring in, NATA has a ground service council, and I think they're really essential to bring in to that whole discussion, so that we are working together, and that's nationally, and then getting down locally, just the way that these construction meetings work out, where you involve all those parties. I think the same way on improving safety or managing safety on the apron areas. I will say that I think we are also progressing, and it will be a slow progression to some infrastructure fixes. I mean, I'm pleased to see greater proliferation of, I mentioned the head of stand roads, which I think is that's a great thing to see at airports, but that's an expensive facility modification that you do. We talked about the deliveries. I mean, a lot of that cropped up post 9/11 with the way that the security, kind of the unintended consequences with the security requirements and trying to get shipments through security checkpoints. And I think that as we progress with terminal designs, I'm hopeful too that we can minimize the amount of traffic, the amount of the Wild West that's out there.
Here's a question that comes up. Now we're starting to see the maturation of the A380, 747-800, and especially worldwide, that's where they're operating mostly, but they're starting to arrive here on our shores, as we are well aware. What are some of the things we picked up, lessons learned from operating that aircraft in today's legacy airfields? And challenges, considerations, something that...
A lot of challenges with the airport design. That very few airports are designed to a Group 6, which would be the A380 and the 747-8. As we look at airports in the future, I think that there's probably more of the large hub airports in the U.S. that are planning ahead now for these large aircraft. Runway to taxiway separation, the runway width. We've looked at a number of airport standards issues and found that, although the airplanes are pretty big, for example, the runway width didn't have to be 200 feet wide. So we are looking at that. We're looking at taxiway design groups, which is a new category in our airport design advisory circular that deals with longer fuselage lengths. And we have a modification of standard process, which essentially gives an airport equivalent level of safety for, let's say, an A380 or a 747-8, that they could have a procedure in lieu of maybe some geometry fixes because of the expense.
Sure.
I was going to add, and it plays off of what Mike was saying. I think a big, incredibly important factor that came in as we tried to adapt to operation of those aircraft on Group 5 airfields was a reassessment of design standards and kind of the premises behind those design standards that really dated back to 1950s, 1960s era. And I think it goes right along with SMS. It's collecting the data, doing appropriate analysis of those data, coming up with real statistics and quantification of things like deviations, which enable you to find what the right and appropriate and justifiable separations ought to be. So I think, and Mike, and also to the folks up in Atlantic City, both played huge roles in that effort.
Definitely. We've got time for one last question. Mark Henniger, please go ahead.
Hey, Mark Henniger with the ALPA's Air Traffic Services Group. Hey, Steve, you're doing a great job. Kevin, good to see you again.
You too.
Just a question. The FAA is redoing Order 8900.9, the runway use order. And up until now, the use of runways at an airport by an air traffic facility was governed by the 7110.65, which essentially said a limit of 5-knot tailwind for operation, except for the paragraph below it that essentially said, unless it's beneficial to do it some other way, which sort of took some of the meat out of that. So now the FAA is looking to extend, with the change of this order, put that up to 10 knots, straight up 10 knots, as opposed to 5 and maybe 10. So my concern is you end up with anemometer error, you end up with some other things, and next thing you know, we're landing with 10, 11, 12, 13 knot tailwinds. I'm kind of wondering how that is affected and what that does for safety on the airport surface, because in a sense, it's air traffic services when you get the clearance, but as soon as you hit the ground, it's airport and ground environment. So I'm kind of wondering what your thoughts are on that. Thank you.
Mark lost me at anemometer, but we go way back. But it seems like it's more of an air traffic control realm.
Yeah, I'm not involved in the rewriting of that order, but I was involved in some safety events around the United States that revolved around tailwind type of operations and that balance. And I think that's what made that come about. I think that we're looking, and obviously we started out talking today about excursions. I think that's where that becomes a matter of concern for sure. So I'm not sure where they're going to go with that, but I do believe that the standard, and when I worked in the control tower, people would always tell you that too. 10 knots was okay, was okay type of thing, and so as I was traveling around talking with people about this, at different big cities, I won't name any off the top of my head, but. People would tell you, and a controller would say, hey, is this putting pressure on people? And that's a tough question to answer. It really is. So I don't know, I'm assuming that we have pilots involved in that. At least I hope we do. And I'm not sure where it's going to go, but I do know it grew out of that issue right there. And perhaps the 10 knots was looked at or evaluated and said, hey, that's the way we should go. Not sure, though.
Great. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being here today. I appreciate your insight. Thanks for putting on a great panel here. I appreciate the questions from the audience. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the forum.
Thank you.